We would have to.
Okay, it's already started.
Yeah, they've started recording.
Yeah.
All right.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Geeta, you might just want to put everyone else on mute.
Okay.
And if they want to raise if they raise their hand, then we can open it up for questions, or we can take questions towards the end. That's the way Paul and I had thought of this program.
Yeah. I think we'll keep it for the end. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of interruptions.
Yeah. So just mute everyone from your end.
Yes.
And I'll manage the unmuting when the time comes.
Okay. And
Paul, if you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah. We are unmuted. You can hear me, right?
Lovely. Yes, I can. Thank you.
Good.
We're good to go.
okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you all for tuning in for today's program, Tales from Museums. We have very interesting personalities. Paul Abraham, who is well known. He is I'll give brief introductions about our speakers today for those of you who are not familiar with them. Paul Abraham is the president of the Hinduja Foundation by the same group, and he's had his banking career for almost 39 years now, and he has become advisor for Indus Bank. But he is here not because of all those things, but he started the Sarmaya Foundation in 2015, which is all about patronizing and collecting art from this part of the world. He has a huge collection, and we're very happy that this was started as a virtual museum. Though they have a lot of on-ground programs, they have talks, workshops, and they're doing quite a lot in connecting the curious people for arts and the youngsters to get introduction into the diverse fields in art. They have a huge collection. They're going to speak about that. And Paul is a postgraduate from IIM Ahmedabad, and then he has his BA Honours degree from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. And he would speak more about his foundation, the Sarmaya, and what they're doing. And also, I would like to introduce his wife, Pavitra, who is here. And she is a well-known designer in her own right. And she runs a firm in the same name, a design firm. And the design extends from architecture, interior design, brand strategy, and product development and all that. So she has 25 years of experience in design, and she's done some very iconic spaces, residences, restaurants, and the Good Earth, which is a very well-known chain of stores. She's designed their space as well, and she's been with the Good Earth for very many years now. And I would like to, I'm delighted to talk about the awards she has won for her design. She's the recipient for Intact Urban Heritage, and she has won other awards. The most important is AD 100. I just got to know about that. This is about 100 top influential designers. So she's very much into it, and we're very happy to have Pavitra be with us today. And she is part of Sarmaya, and she does a lot of programs and talks through their foundation. And Pradeep Chakravarti, of course, we all know the Chennaites know him very well. He is a HR person basically, but well-known art historian. He's done many books on lesser-known temples in Tamil Nadu, and he's well known. He's well received for his wonderful talks on various topics in mythology, temples, conservation, heritage, and other things connected to it. His books are very popular, and he has done many leadership programs for HR. Mainly, he combines the Western ideology with Indian philosophy and brings all that into, making the workspace more effective. And I was part of some of the workshops he did in Dakshin Chitra. So I'm really happy to have you all. And all the other members, our board members, FOD members who tuned in to be with us today. Welcome you all. And yes, please, Paul, I think you can start.
And I just wanted to say a few things. Yeah. Thanks, Geeta, for the introduction. And I think we'll start the conversation now. For those of you, I'm really happy that many people have joined today, and I'm guessing some of you may not have visited the Dakshin Chitra campus in Chennai. This is a very unique museum, a living heritage art center where across the years, committed conservationists and people who are very keen and passionate about vernacular architecture and art and the way of life in India's villages, which are fast disappearing, have been able to, with a lot of blood and sweat, been able to bring complete homes that are representative of the 4 states of South India into one campus. And the adjoining places have been very masterfully designed by that well-known conservation architect, Benny Kuriakose. This idea of connecting out with many museums came up when the lockdown started, and it looks like the lockdown is going to continue for some more time, in order to stay in touch with people and talk about the good work of not just Dakshin Chitra, but many other museums in India as well. So at Dakshin Chitra, we're hoping to make this a regular program, an online program where we will reach out to many other museums like Sarmaya, look at their collections, look at what we can learn from them, and what they can pick up from us as well in Dakshin Chitra. So I'm really happy that Paul and Pavitra have set the ball rolling with the first one. So Paul, I think some basic questions first. How you came about to start Sarmaya, and what should we first know about Sarmaya before we get into the whole space of digital museums?
Okay, I think, before I start the story, thanks for having me here. And I would also like to introduce a person who's in our audience. She's our archive director, Avehi Menon. So she's also here. So Sarmaya started, the seed was sown many decades ago when my father, who moved from Kerala to Delhi way back in 1948, he carried with him a little bottle of Travancore coins, which he presented to me as a teenager. And in those days, that kind of sowed a seed of interest in terms of, coins and history. And of course, being a Malayali growing up in Delhi, there was no way I could have gotten hold of Travancore coins. So for the initial part, I was just, attending numismatic club meetings, society meetings, exhibitions and all that. And as I grew older and when I had the ability to set aside a little bit of money, I started to acquire. And what could be acquired, of course, was what is easily available in the north, mostly Mughal and Islamic coins. But over the years, of course, one has collected a much broader range of coins. Coins led to maps, because even as recent as 100 years ago, many of the cities reflected on the coins as mints do not exist by that same name. So I started collecting old maps to try and kind of piece everything together. And also most of the Islamic coins being in the Persian/Urdu/Arabic script, I invested about 8 years to learn Urdu so that I could kind of, interpret some of these coins. Coins led to, maps. Maps led to engravings. Engravings led to, the end of the Mughal dynasty. When I was in London once and at an exhibition, I saw a bunch of photographs taken by a very famous photographer called Felice Beato. He had come to cover the mutiny of 1857, but by the time he arrived in Calcutta, he was a little late. And so he went across northern India, literally taking the aftermath. He had just covered the Crimean War. So he came back to India to cover the 1857 mutiny, but was essentially in 1858. And that was some of the earliest, most iconic photographs. And what was also useful was that he staged some of those photos. He actually took, bodies and all and threw them in front of monuments and then took photos to try and create the sense of drama. And then, of course, that got me going with black and white photography of the 19th century. And of course, what's interesting is that in India, literally 10 years after photography started, typically it's attributed to 1849 Everard for the typical photographs which we call album and prints. In about 4 or 5 years thereafter, photography was in India. And of course, after that, it's really, kind of multiplied because of the need.
And we have a Chennai connection there, Paul, because the Chennai College of Arts used to teach photography as a subject.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So
back to you, sorry.
So then photography happened. So one thing led to the other. And then of course on the, parallel, I was also interested in, traditional indigenous art and contemporary art. So the indigenous art led me to travel around India, meeting a lot of, artists and a lot of the genres, and I can, touch upon later in the evening some of them. And then, of course, Pavitra and I started this journey together in 2017, and it's been, Sarmaya growing little by little ever since.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something on to that, Pavitra?
No, I think Paul has summed up how the Sarmaya journey started, and yeah, I think I would just add that one of the things that sort of distinguishes maybe the Sarmaya collection from other collections is that this has really been a passion-based collection. So many of the other museum archives tend to make sort of very, and I think that's wise in some ways, very certain decisions about what they want to acquire and what they don't want to acquire. I think what is very interesting about Sarmaya and the collection is that it's a collection of art, but it's also Paul's story and Paul's journey and sort of what he has resonated with, and now what we like together. And so I think that is something that distinguishes the collection. And when you look across the objects, even when we think they're not connected, we find that there is some common thread that, some passion that sort of binds the whole collection together.
Right. So when we're looking at the Sarmaya Museum collection, then I guess we're talking about coins, predominantly Islamic, and there are album and prints, and there's indigenous art as well. So do you want to double click on some of these, Paul and Pavitra, to go into a little bit more and show us some of your treasures? That would be interesting for us.
I can show you that I scheduled to show it a little later.
Sure.
I will show you. So see, essentially today I wanted to talk about 2-3 things.
Sure.
One was the essence and logic of Sarmaya. Second, why did we start this whole digital journey? Even though we did on-ground programming and things like that, why was digital also chosen as the option for growth? And the third, of course, is a sampling of some of the collections so that you get a sense of what it is. So can I show a couple of slides?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Second.
I think you can share the screen.
Yeah, one second.
Sorry, we were reviewing the presentation, so we're right at the end.
That's fine.
Give us a second.
We'll have a double look at all the important images. There you go.
There we are.
Okay, so
Also, I have to ask you this before you start. What does the logo mean?
So the logo is actually a window to the world. So these are actual, the Jharoka type of windows. And the idea was that, through our storytelling and through our, outreach, we are going to be telling you so much about India. We have so much that any amount of storytelling is not enough. And yet, often, so many of us don't know enough about our own culture and our own heritage and our own arts.
And maybe, Paul, you can share what Sarmaya means, because as a good Madras and Bangalore raised girl, I certainly didn't know what the word meant. But Paul, maybe you can explain
Yeah,
why
Sarmaya actually is more used in Urdu, but it's owned both by Devanagari and Urdu. It means property, wealth, and in our context means collective wealth. So it means what belongs to all of us. Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay. So let me do a quick run through of this. So, like you said, there are 6 or 7 genres in the collection. We have.
Sorry, can you put it on a slideshow mode? We're on presenter mode. So we can see 2-3 slides on the screen, so it's a little confusing.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
So, just to show that this is a mix of on-ground and online. So if you see, we actually do physical exhibitions. The top left is a physical exhibition in the Museum of Christian Art in Goa. We do, curated visits to the archive where people come and actually can literally see and touch objects subject to all the necessary controls. We use technology quite extensively. So if you see the middle panel, these are all talks by different people. So, they come on digital properties like Instagram. We've also started doing a lot of our talks in the vernacular, and we record them in some key languages. On the right is, again, smaller groups where offices come to us. The one at the bottom is work we do with the differently abled. So this bottom one is when we actually created replicas of our artwork, and this was for those who are visually, challenged, and we actually created, that's an Ara painting. You'll see the same painting later in the thing, where we created a 3D painting. We actually also infused it with perfume so that the kid could actually smell. So use all the other senses to actually get a sense of what that artwork was. Okay, so the logic of Sarmaya and why digital, I think, a lot of times I've been questioned, about the whole concept of this rasa, the sense of wonder of standing in front of a physical object, which is, actually true. It's always wonderful to be able to engage with the actual object. But having said that, how many of us can? And if you see, today, museums have been hit so hard simply because they can't even benefit from physical attendance. And therefore, what has happened is that, they're all grappling with how to kind of create that outreach, create that engagement. Digital, therefore, to my mind, is not an option that people can, push aside or delay adoption. I think everyone must, because it multiplies the, the reach. And fundamentally, when we say we are a museum without boundaries, it's about a few things. It's about ensuring access to as many as possible. It's talking about a point of view. And, it's also essentially that India today has devices which have penetrated such large, swathes of our population, and yet they do not have the ability to come into a urban setting to see a museum. If you look at it, a large part of our museums, are in urban locations, and the rest of India literally misses out. And some of the things that we've noticed is that there is interest. There is a lot of interest out there, and especially when we work with our partners who reach out to schools, some of the NGOs, the numbers are humongous. To give you an example, we work with Pratham in one of our programs, which only creates content for 3 states of Pratham, and in those 3 states we have 60,000 children who continually engage with us. Now, that's a number you can never imagine coming to a physical museum in any kind of small time frame. So that those are some of the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that to say that, it's actually, we at Sarmaya, we call it ways of seeing, which is actually this idea somehow that, when you go to a museum, the feeling is that it's a one-way conversation,
True.
right? So you have people who believe that they know more, that they are in a position to share more, and that may well be true. But I think what we feel very strongly is that the love of art and culture and living traditions begins with the experience itself. And to experience something, you don't need somebody to explain to you how you feel. And I think one of the things that digital really allowed us to do is to go beyond that way of storytelling, where there's one person telling the story and another person listening. So whether it is that you write on Instagram and then people, write back to you, share their own anecdotes, their own ideas, or we did a very, very exciting collaboration during the last lockdown, actually, probably the first time that it's happened really, that in India or abroad, where we collaborated with a museum in Zurich in real time. So we were doing we did a film on shadow puppetry on the Tolu Bomalata puppets, and at the same time, the Museum Rietberg in Zurich was doing an entire show on the wayang puppets of Indonesia. And because of the power of digital, what we were able to do is to show both these exhibitions together. And so rather than being as an audience in the position of choosing one or the other, or seeing one narrative but not being aware that there is another, we were able to use digital to actually create a far more inclusive, a far more inclusive experience about the story of puppetry itself. So I think that's a big thing for us.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think I totally resonate with this here, because I've seen some absolutely fabulous museums in the non-urban places in states like Tamil Nadu, Tirunelveli, Pudukkottai. Fabulous pieces of not just antiquities but also antiques from, say, about the 17th, 18th century. But they are displayed, and I think they're displayed in the best way when the museum was originally started. But it's still, like Pavitra, you were saying, it's a very one-way kind of a display, right? It's there. There's a small caption close by, and that's it. So the viewer, beyond seeing something, the viewer is not able to get too much of an interaction with that. But I think that's why there is a very important space for places like Darshan Chitra, where vessels, for example, are displayed in the kitchen, or you have a room which has all those old lithographs and those photographs. So the setting is very different. And if just outside there's a puppetry presentation happening, or a street craft happening, then there's so much more of a connection and an integration of the viewer's experience across senses with the object itself.
Yeah, I think one of the things Paul and I keep talking about is this idea that in our culture, in India, we actually learn in a multiplicity of ways. We learn, it's an oral tradition at the end of the day. So I think Dakshin Chitra was way ahead of its time, and I've come many times and I've always loved it, because it's at the cusp of architecture, art, living traditions, and also living practices. So in cultures such as ours, where you don't have books that codify everything that went before, places like this become so important, because you can't really understand one without understanding the context of the other.
Absolutely. It's that wholesome experience that is important. It is not. It's a beautiful work of art, but it's so much more beyond that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So just to give you a sense of, what are the various properties that we use. So, we have the typical website, of course, which everybody has. But if you actually, come to the website, you can, see exhibitions happening on the website as if you are in a room watching works of art, right? So that is something that is for you. Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Then you can pull up various levels of information. So you have your typical metadata, which is there. And then, of course, as you click on it, you will get more and more layers of information. The same thing is here. If you look at the, most important device which we have today is the mobile phone. So the museum is literally available to you on the mobile phone, and all the categories are there, So at the click of literally the button, you can actually see most of what is there, and all the stories and all the associated stuff is. Yeah. Okay, then just to come to, some of the other properties. So apart from things like websites and, more like digital exhibitions and all of that, and how devices are important. If you look at, Instagram, which is a property that we use, it's a very visual channel. So you have the ability to grasp somebody's attention, okay, through the first visual interface and a brief story. And then you can lead them into subsequent properties of yours, which allow for more long form engagement, articles, research, all of that is there in other properties. So for example, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have the website, and we have the YouTube channel. So you could come into Instagram, get interested in something, get the hook and get engaged, and then go into Facebook or the website or into YouTube and see far more details. So if you see this Instagram on the left, which is the screenshot from the phone. Yeah. So, this, you see the various things that are happening. So every panel is a small story, a small visual. And then when you click on it, you kind of, go into the detail. And then this is, say, for example, a particular post on the left. And if you see the post,
if you look at the engagement, we had 10,300 views.
Fantastic.
And this was in a space of 3-4 days.
Right.
I don't think there's any museum that has, that kind of footfall or.
And if you see this.
And I just love the way of what you guys have done in terms of not just having the visual, but you have the news, the audio over there, and then there's some animation as well.
Yeah,
so it makes it that much more intensive.
We'll just show you that, Pradeep. But what is interesting here, this particular channel, which is Instagram, apart from the visual representation, it's also got other sub properties. So if you want to do something more detailed, it allows you to load a video. So it's like a Instagram TV, So you get small snippet, say a 5-minute talk by an expert on a particular object. You can load it here and anyone can see it. And the thing is that the engagement can be continual. You don't have to come one day and then for, till you go back to the museum, you don't have anything to see. And so just taking one of the posts. So if you see this particular post, can you hear?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So if you see that, these are 5 separate objects from the Sarmaya collection. Okay. Now, if I put each of these individually, I may have to adopt a certain approach to get you to engage. But that previous screenshot which I showed you actually alludes to all 5 and has taken elements out of each. So you have the tiger from the painting in the middle. You have the jewelry from an old book on jewelry. You have a photograph at the bottom of the Amber Palace in Jaipur. And you have an embroidered pichwai from the collection, which takes, so you take out elements of these, put it together, create something interesting, and then take people back to these which are available on your website or on YouTube or wherever. And what is interesting is that, you don't have to kind of talk about you have to first grab the attention, and then you have to take them through the journey.
It's just a different way of thinking of it, right? Is it really important that I engage with every single detail of the object? Or is it more important that I feel drawn into some stories and then I follow that trail on my own? You know, we always use the example of saying Christopher Columbus set out to find India, he went to America instead. Is that wrong? Did he not discover something? So I think for us, it's not so much about mapping A to B to C, but to allow people to choose the experience of their own journey and follow that thread.
Yeah, and I think in that way you're giving them the freedom to choose where they want to spend more time, where they want to spend less time, and even just get to understand something that, I mean, paintings like this, I'm assuming, or jewelry like this, not everybody is going to have in their own collections, right? So to see something, it can be forbidding if you see a whole bunch of these things in the first shot. But if you give it to them in stages and you give them the freedom to navigate themselves, then I think the passion and the interest will bloom much more deeper.
And you know, we live in a world, and the audience that we're trying to talk to, a young audience, I mean, between Paul and I, we have 4 boys. Our boys don't read anything in books. Everything they read is through video, through audio, through podcasts, through what they see on their computers. So we realized that actually creating visual content was the way to hook people, younger people, into connecting with the objects themselves. And I think we have a quick
Yeah, so if you see, this is how this.
just to see how this got put together. We just thought it'd be interesting for you to see how this actually got put together.
So that's the photo, crop. That's elements from the jewelry. That's the tiger from the painting, people from the photograph. They've all come together into one visual, right? And then you deconstruct back. Now, this also begs the question, what is the new expertise that we may need in a museum, going forward? And of course, design skills, people who know various animation and all of that, people who are familiar with some of these new properties that are popular with the youngsters. For example, now one of the hottest new properties is something called Clubhouse.
Yep.
You know, a lot of people are on Clubhouse, and is that something that we can use to amplify the storytelling?
And so, I'm reliably informed by my nephews and nieces that today older people, and that's anybody who's 30 and above, prefer Facebook, but the younger people look only at Instagram. So
yeah,
Instagram is very visual. So I think that's a big asset.
And I think I really love the way in clicks even over here, you're tempting the viewer, and the tiger doesn't go across the building, but he actually goes inside. So in a way, I think you're trying to get us to go inside and see more.
I mean, that's a lovely interpretation. That's a lovely interpretation.
Okay, and then just to continue, we have a lot of this, constant engagement, storytelling, which are all, as they happen live. So there are conversations that happen live. There are movies that are shown live. We make movies as part of our, process of engaging and, providing patronage to artistic communities. And then the bottom panel is when we had, the real-time program with the Museum Rietberg, where we had a real-time walkthrough of the exhibition with the curator explaining the works of art, and the audience anywhere in the world being able to sign on and see that, right? So it's something which struck us in COVID because we couldn't travel. Does that mean we shut out all the institutions of the world from our, itinerary? And the answer was clearly no. You may not have 100% experience, but don't deny yourself 80%, right? So, and the ability to learn far more in terms of the detail. Okay, this is some of the work we do with various, schools. So there's a lot of outreach activity that happens. There's actual workshops. There's a bunch of, content. There are, stencils. There are quizzes. There's homework of different kind. Right now during COVID, summer holiday time, kids have got various exercises in art, in craft and history. We try and keep it as visual as possible so that the children stay engaged.
I think one of the things I would just like to add here is that, learning is always both ways. And I think one of the things that we've realized through our outreach is just how much personally we have learned. In Bombay, we partner with an organization called City as a Lab. And what they do is they work with BMC schools. They work with, not the sort of the elite private schools, but the other schools. And they create a whole platform of outside the classroom learning, where children actually present on issues that are of concern to them. And they invited us to do a workshop for them, and it was absolutely amazing. We did a Gond workshop for them, and the children actually used Gond characters and Gond, the ways in which Gond stories are told, the patterns, the pattern making, and talked about the most, you know absolutely, it was mind blowing, the issues they talked about. They talked about things like urban waste, they talked about sanitation, they talked about poor sort of poor urban corporation coverage, so how it affected their lives, loose wires, buildings with poor infrastructure. They talked about sexual harassment uh, in schools and outside. They talked about toilets, they talked about gender. It was incredible to see what, just having the opportunity to use art to tell their own stories opened up this floodgate, and they were able to talk about so much more that they did in their projects. It was quite a moving experience.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that conversation also not only increased their sensitivity, but it must have also helped in some kind of a healing or coming to terms with it.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
So in a situation like this, how does it work, Paul and Pavitra? Do you take your Gond paintings collections to the school, or do they see this online? How does it work?
So, so some of it happens online, and in the times before COVID, and hopefully very soon after COVID, we also have the ability to go with actual works or sometimes with replicas. Depends, if the work is somewhat expensive, we try and create replicas. Otherwise, there are live video sessions that happen with the kids. So, for example, we did a program with a school in Lucknow, and again taught, this whole concept of our various tribal communities and their art forms. And what happened was that these kids were, asked to make fantasy characters in that particular format. So they made all these fantasy characters, and then the school principal said that, God, this is amazing stuff. What do we do? And then there was a local theater director engaged who came on board and actually saw these fantasy characters and said, God, let's do a play using these fantasy characters. So there was full script that was written down. And then finally, all this culminated in the kids performing in front of an audience of 1,500 in Lucknow, right? So after that, the kids have never been the same. They keep demanding for content.
Yeah, I think also we live in a world now where everyone is a co-creator. So you can take a selfie, you can use your phone, you can use a filter, you can use a GIF, right? And I think it's an interesting point that you raised, Pradeep, and Paul talked about the Lucknow play, but this idea of taking the art and showing the original piece of art. Of course, there's a beauty and there's a certain wonderful feeling to be in the presence of the original. But I think for us, it really goes beyond that, particularly in the outreach, because what we're trying to do in the outreach is to empower every child to think of themselves as a creator and to think of their stories as both original and valid. I think too often, particularly in our country and really all over the world, many stories are marginalized. They're marginalized because of gender, they're marginalized because of caste, opportunity, geography. So I think at Sarmaya, we feel very, very strongly that the art we show, it's like Paul's coins in the Vaseline bottle. The coins were only a conduit to begin a lifelong journey of learning and searching and finding joy. And I think that's what we want to do with our objects. So for us, it's less about are you seeing the real object, or and more about can we bring the object to you in a way that you can make it yours and engage with it and do something else with it. We did a show, it was called Nation of Portraits, Portrait of a Nation, which was an on-ground show at Pandol Art Gallery, where we showed over 100 19th century photographs that really dissected this idea of nationhood, you know, and what really makes us a nation and what brings us together as people with our built heritage, with our geographical boundaries. And as part of that, we did outreach with a group of, differently abled children. And it was incredible. So rather than trying to get them to see the photographs and sort of, you know, explain that object to them, what we did is we had them bring their own photographs and color those in and make painted photographs of themselves, you know, and just the empowerment when those children felt when they put in their mother or their father or themselves or a pet, you know, I think that really speaks to the heart of what we want to do with the outreach.
Lovely. And I think this portrait idea of bringing it into the context of their own lives, and your Lucknow example of where you moved it from a visual experience to a somatic body experience of bringing theater in. At Dakshina Chitra, we try to do that very often when we do corporate events and we do a dance performance. And our traditional dances were not just about people seeing the dance, right? It was also participating in the dance. And we found very often that when corporate clients get into that, they start moving their body, they become more comfortable with that. And there's a lot of learning from that also, just being flexible, because if in the corporate world, we hear enough talk about, thinking outside the box and to be creative and innovative. But if they're sitting in one chair all their time and they're just on the computer all the time, the body is not working with mind to be cooperative. And I think it's these ways of getting the body to move using art which will really help people think differently and be more wholesome in their way they look at themselves.
You know, we told some children from Dharavi, we worked on a project in Dharavi, and when we told them Paul's story and how he started out in Delhi as a young boy, just dreaming and playing in horse cars, and never imagined what the journey would be like, and then to start from a few coins and then follow that passion and learn. I think the biggest takeaway from for them was this feeling that this I can do this too.
Right.
And I think that is the empowerment that we really feel we want to talk about at Sarmaya, which is validating identity and experience for everyone.
Right. I'm just mindful of time that we have about 20 minutes. So if you want to,
Yeah. So now I've moved into the next phase, you wanted to see some of the objects in the collection.
Yeah.
So let me kind of start with where it all started. So it was coins that started it all, right? So here is a story. In the old Mughal system and a lot of the Islamic systems, when somebody sat on the throne, there were two things they did. One is they read the khutbah, that is the invocation to Allah at Friday prayer in their name. And the second one was issue coin. So issuing coin was a symbol of kinship. But also what happened is that this was a dog-eat-dog world. So the moment somebody sat on the throne, the first thing they did was collect all the others and put them under house arrest in what was typically known as a Salatin Khana. Salatin being the plural of Sultan. So this was all the blue blood, anyone who could potentially be a rival would be put into house arrest. In some of the more aggressive ones, they would just slaughter them. But in many of the Indian ones, they would actually just put them in. So this was
That was the Mughal tradition, right? That you
Yeah.
never appointed an heir. It was the fittest which survived.
Yeah. So this particular case is very interesting. And that is because this particular guy, Niku Seer, he, were it not for this coin, there was no evidence that he ever sat on the throne. Okay. There is only one known coin. There are two known coins. One is this, and one there is with a Pakistani collector who we understand never shows this coin. So effectively what you're seeing is not a pretty coin, but from a rarity and a historicity perspective, an incredible, rare, piece of history. So this guy, there were two kingmakers, the Sayyid brothers and a guy called Birbal, not Akbar's Birbal, another Birbal, in Agra. Birbal was in Agra, the Sayyid brothers were in Delhi. They put this guy on the throne. He was in the Salatin Khana almost all his life. They put him on the throne. He quickly issued coins because that he had to do. Meantime, the army marched from Delhi. He was defeated, taken to Delhi, put in the prison there, and he died in prison. So he had a few days of glory. And this is the symbol of his having sat on the throne briefly. And it's very, very rare. So rarity is what you see here.
Paul, maybe you want to share a little bit about how you got this coin and why you decided.
Yeah, so this was a coin that was in an auction, and some of the museums, other museums, leading museums of the world were in the auction, and there was furious bidding going on. And I realized that if I did get this coin, it would probably be lost to India forever, and it would sit in some other museum's collection.
You were up against the British Museum, right? We can't say.
Sorry. We know the secret now. But Paul, we're very anxious to see more because we just have another 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So this is one story. So while we are on coins, this is a gold mohar. Again, very interesting story. When Aurangzeb sat on the throne, he asked all his coins to remove what we call the kalima, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is the invocation to Allah, which is here where my cursor is. Because he felt that in the hands of kafirs, this will get defiled. And this coin was the first one where kalima was reintroduced by a subsequent namesake, Alamgir II. And he said, I mean, that's not, a valid theory, Let this coin have this, it embellishes the coin, and doesn't matter, people who have it will give it the due respect. So this was the first gold mohar which reintroduced the kalima by a subsequent emperor of the Mughal throne called Alamgir II.
Paul, I'm assuming that these coins are much smaller. You've enlarged them for the benefit of us to see them.
They're the typical, 1 rupee, 2 rupee size coins of ours today.
Okay, thank you.
Then there's this 19th century photography, and you can see how, in those days, a photographer had to move with a retinue of 40, 50 people, carrying chemicals, carrying his dark room, carrying tent, carrying plates, glass plates, and things like that. So it was not something that was easy to achieve. Secondly, you stood somewhere, you kind of composed a photo, ran into the tent, made your glass plate, put all the chemicals, ran out, put that in, took the photo, ran back into the tent and developed it. And in those times, to actually get a photo with this clarity, and this is a panorama where he has taken two images and stitched them together. And as you can see in the middle, you can see the discoloration here. This is actually because of the fold. The fold lets light through and it kind of damages the photograph. Okay.
I think.
So what would be the size of this photograph, just out of curiosity?
This will be about 1.5 to 2 feet long.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But Paul, it's also the fact that it was Kabul was considered part of the Indian.
Yeah. So it also goes to show that, during the British time, the boundaries of what was then India, British India, went all the way there, from Kabul through to Burma. So this is, evidence of, if you look at the, bunch of British soldiers standing there and posing.
Right.
And these
I'm sure you have collection. I'm sure you have collection. Your collection has photographs of Edmund Leon, and in his book on photographs of South India, he talks about the absolutely hot summer and how he has to travel across with cows and all of that stuff. So
yes. So
it wasn't an easy job going all the way across for taking photographs.
We have the original album of Edmund Leon. Now, this is a very interesting photograph. I referred to Elise Beato. Now, this is a photograph he took immediately after the 1857 mutiny. And this is the Kashmiri Gate. And this was literally the last bastion which crumbled and the mutiny ended. And you can see all the, bullet and cannon holes. These are all, cannonballs. And you can see on the top here, the spire of the St. James's Church. So imagine this is a photo taken literally a few months after the mutiny, and it has survived all these years in pristine condition.
So would this have been one of those glass plates, Paul?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is of the same day when he took this. This was the bastion that was breached, and people went in. And again, you see, this is a big panorama, and because it was folded down the middle, this is very sensitive to light. So the preservation is a challenge. And of course, over the years, if they were not kept well, these are two rare photographs from the collection. And it's interesting because both of them ended up being in Calcutta. They were both people associated with, iconic kingdoms, sultanates, whatever you wish to call. So the man on the left here is Tipu Sultan's son. This is a photograph of his, and it's the only known son whose photograph we have in record. And this, of course, is the famous Wajid Ali Shah, the Shatranj ke Khiladi man. This is an actual photograph of his from, around that time. So you have these, so whenever you imagine, now you don't really need to wonder what did these guys look like. You actually have photo images. This is a very beautiful triptych. It's an engraving, and this is of the famous Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, which was in 1799, and which actually literally made the British the powers of the South, as the mutiny had made them powers in the North. And this was made by a guy called Robert Kerr Porter, sitting in London without ever having physically visited India. So he heard stories about what the mutiny was like. He made this. The original was there displayed in London in the Guildhall or whatever, and thousands of people came to see it. And then this became a popular collectible. So there was huge demand. The original is 120 feet long and totally made from hearsay and imagination. Then after, these were copies made. This particular copy was made for Lord Wellesley, and it was made in 1802, 1803. And we have it in the collection. And what happened was a black and white engraving was made and then hand painted to show the heat of the battle. And you can they have a key which actually tells you. And there on top in yellow is Tipu. So you can see that.
I'm guessing, Paul, this is on paper and triptych, meaning there are 3 parts to it.
Yeah, it's a triptych. It's 3 parts, and it's about 8-9 feet long, and about 3 feet in height, or 2.5 feet in height.
So we're just mindful of time. It's 7, and I'm guessing people might have questions. So if you want to just do 2-3 more of the highlights.
Okay, so let me just zip. So these are some of the more indigenous artworks. So this is Jangar Singh Sham. People might know he was the iconic Gond painter. This is art from Mithila. in Bihar. This is what we call a Chandarbo. This is from a Gujarati tradition called Matani Pachedi. This was the canopy under which they said prayers. This piece is about 20 feet by 20 feet, and it's an old textile. These
That's
are
embroidered, right?
no,
Wedge dye printed,
wedge dye.
Edged and printed. Wow.
painted and printed both.
So I'm guessing when you make this interactive for people, then you're comparing it with other textiles and you're creating a story out of that.
Yes, there are various stories, and what is interesting is this was a community called the Wagris, who were nomadic tribes, and they say that they were restrained from going into temples, so they made their own spiritual shrines which they carried with themselves, and they would just kind of stretch it out and pray in front of that.
So in a way, pretty much like how lockdown is making us think of creative ways to achieve our ends, huh?
Absolutely, God is everywhere.
Absolutely.
Okay, these are some of our more modern works. So we have a whole collection of them. So I won't kind of dwell on
Lovely.
that.
Any books, Paul, on your PPT today, or should we go back to your Instagram page?
Yeah, you go back to the website. There's a full collection section there. There are old books there, and there is a big library for reference. If anyone ever wants to come by and refer, there's over 10,000 books in the library. So
Wow.
you can go. Now this is more contemporary work. This is a incredibly talented artist from the UK. His name is Jethro Buck. He actually trained and learned miniature art in Jaipur, and goes back and he works. This is a large canvas, and he's actually creating the painting is called Wild Things, and it's his version of how the world is evolving in terms of the conservation, wildlife, all of those things, and thrown in a little bit of fantasy into it. This is a project that is close to my heart, and this is about, when we talked about identity, I belong to a community called the Kranaya, who is supposed to have come to Kerala, many hundreds of years ago and settled 72 families from a place called Sanli Urfa in southern Turkey. And when we came to Kerala, we were Christian, and in those days there was only one denomination of Christianity, which is now, of course, many hundred all over the world. But most importantly, what happened is that when I was growing up in Delhi, the perception of Christian or Christian Log, as we are known in Delhi, was that these were guys who started off this religion post the colonial interventions, forgetting that in India, Christianity is 2000 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I was imagining, what if Christianity was an Eastern religion, and how would life in times of Jesus be depicted? So I've embarked on this project. This is still work in progress. I work with a artist from Bhilwara, who's comes from a very illustrious family of miniature painters. We conceptualize, I tell the stories, I conceptualize it for him, and he paints it. And these are all various episodes or moments in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the life of time of Jesus. And they are made in the Hamza Nama style. So a Persian style from a story talking about the Christian viewpoint, and made by an Indian miniature artist who draws from many local Rajasthani painting traditions. So this is some of that work there.
And you do, in a way, Paul, I think you're also carrying forth an ancient Kerala tradition, right? There was a group of singers, I think Panars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Panambata.
Panambata, right? So they would go to Christian homes, they would sing Christian songs. When they went to Hindu homes, they'd sing Hindu songs.
Yes. Yes.
And it's lovely to see art building that bridge between two religions.
So this was this, Last Supper. And I said that instead of Da Vinci's version of everyone sitting around a table, very fancy, this would be the typical way it would be if it were an Eastern, reflection of an evening meal, where everyone sits together on the floor around a fire, right?
And this, of course, references a very great miniature painter, Nain Sook, probably one of the best known miniaturists, from the court of Raja Balwant Singh, and he painted in a very contemporary style in the 1800s. So I think this references that
Yeah.
painting.
So that's it as far as I'm concerned. Any questions? I'm happy to take. I mean, I always encourage people to come and visit the website. If you're in Bombay, visit our archive. Very soon we'll restart. And if there are any questions, happy to.
Paul, do you hope to have this is Ratik Jha, do you
Yes.
hope to have a physical museum sometime when the world opens up?
Well, it's a dream. I spent a fair amount of time trying to, hunt for some space, which I wasn't successful in. So I kind of currently operate out of an archive in Mumbai. But yes, inshallah, someday.
Paul, do you want to take the two questions that are on the chat? The first question was, did photography as we know it exist in the 19th century? I thought that there were paintings and sketches.
So photography as we know it started in 1839, they say, but that was what they call the daguerreotype, which is essentially a single image on a metal plate. So if you wanted copies, you couldn't. But in 1849, there was a gent called Everard. So both Daguerre and Everard were both Frenchmen. And so, a lot of the initial developments in photography are attributed to the French. And Everard actually created the first ability to create a negative and then reproduce and create many positives. So it was the way of creating more copies. And that initially started, and it was called the most common one. Of course, there were 100 variants because you use different chemicals, you different styles and all of that. But the most popular one was what they call the albumin print. And the reason why it's called albumin is literally that you use egg white to bind the chemical to the sheets.
I call that question was
There's
from
another
me,
question.
Krishnan.
Sorry, yes, Mr. Krishnan, go ahead.
No. I was telling Paul, the question was from me, Krishnan.
Oh, see.
So I told Pradeep when I heard about this program that I will definitely attend this.
Lovely to have you. Paul, the other question is the River Thames Jethro, is that River Thames in the Jethro Buck painting?
It is.
Okay.
That's the River Thames, and those many geese walking are actually literally geese on his farm, on his father's farm, and that's his father leading them. Apparently, even today, when his father takes the feed out, they walk behind him in a line. So
Wow.
he kind of embedded that there.
Right. Just one second. Some people are leaving because I have other things to do. I just wanted to say that for those of you who are leaving, you want to be part. Dakshin Chitra wants to do more of these with other museums. So either you can reach out to Lalita Krishnan, who's on the chat, or you can message us on Facebook or Instagram if you want to be on our list for future museums. But if you want to stay on and ask a couple of more questions, please do. Sorry, somebody else. I just interrupted someone.
I'm a student of museum studies, and I want to know that apart from curiosity, what are the other attributes that a budding professional needs to cultivate in order to get into this field?
Passion.
Who was that? Kasturi?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Kasturi.
Yeah, Kasturi. I think one is curiosity, at least initially, when we were all a little poorer. Certainly, curiosity is one. A lot of hard work, though, which is the other, because some of these things are, the end product looks very beautiful and all of that, but what goes into them, the actual, tradition behind it, the story behind it, the, conceptualizing and the mythology, and etc., etc. So there is, for example, a genre in our collection.
Paul, sorry, can I interrupt you for a second? Lots of people are leaving, so I want to say that please do follow us. Our Instagram handle is @Sarmaya_India. On Instagram, we are on Facebook as Sarmaya India, and our website is www.sarmaya.in. Sorry, I just wanted to say that before people.
No, good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, so, like for example, the leather puppets of South India. Now, leather puppets look very beautiful, but you can't engage with them as an object without knowing the fact that this was a community that migrated in the more recent times from Maharashtra, came all the way down to Tanjore, where they settled initially, then moved up to Andhra. Some went up to Orissa, some went to Karnataka and Kerala. So there are many variants to leather puppetry, and each of them draws upon different sources in terms of the texts. So the Andhra tradition draws on the Ranganatha Ramayana. The Tamil Nadu tradition and the Kerala tradition draws on the Kamba Ramayana. And the Kerala tradition is about, a private performance to the goddess, while the Andhra and the Karnataka and the Tamil Nadu traditions are about audiences. They had so one of the interesting attributes when we talk about Indonesia and India. In Indonesia, there are jester characters in this. So Indonesia was a very Hindu tradition till Islam came to Indonesia. So for example, in Indonesia, Draupadi has only one husband, because it's haram to have more than one husband. A husband can have multiple wives, that's a different issue. So,
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Paul. I think there were a lot of other questions. So.
One element. The jester character in called Simal in the Indonesian tradition is the most wise, wiser than Krishna. While in the Indian tradition, the most wise person as an advisor is Krishna, right? So there are these wonderful, things. So when you are talking about curiosity should also create within you the need to explore, and the exploration journey is the most fascinating.
So Kasturi, I just want to add one more thing, because both Pavitra and Paul have not said this, and I know them fairly well as friends as well. I think one thing that I've found about both of them, and I can definitely see that in the way they've digitally worked on Sarmaya, is a very strong focus on how do you get my passion communicated to a person who may not know much about it. And if we don't put ourselves in their shoes, then it becomes very difficult, because they may not know, they might not even have that patience. I think that quality I've seen in both of them, their ability to look at it from the client's perspective.
So does that refer to a watered down version of what the actual thing is? Sometimes I feel that it is broken down in such simple terms that we just receive the watered down version of the actual thing.
I think it's a question of perspective, right? That in itself, if I may suggest, in itself is an elitist idea. Why do we assume that only one way is the full experience? If I don't speak a language, if I don't understand it, but if I'm there in the moment, I go to watch a Sufi performance. I may not understand the story, I may not know the antecedents, but in that moment, I could be transported. And that is as valid and as valuable as anything else. So I think as Sarmaya, we don't see ourselves in the role of passing a judgment on any of this. What we see is that we are on a journey, a beautiful journey of exploration and discovery and finding joy in a shared culture. And along the way, we meet so many interesting people. In some cases, we have stories to share. In many cases, they have stories that just enrich our lives. And often we pick up a thread and follow that down, and it takes us to another wonderful place. I mean, Jethro Buck, for example, we saw his work on Instagram and we followed him all the way to a show in Baroda. We actually went to Baroda. His painting finally didn't make it because it was stuck in customs. And the painting we went to see didn't happen. We ended up meeting so many other amazing artists and hearing so many other wonderful perspectives. So I think for us, it's not so much, is there one way that tells you everything? And are you getting, our thing is dip your feet in the water. Some of you will swim, some will take a boat, some will surf, some will sit on the beach, and it all works.
Yeah. So Sharath is one of the pillars of Dakshina Chitra, and he's got a question for you, Paul, a very tactical question. How big is your technical team? And the creation of the animated frame you showed us, the different objects, must have been a lot of effort. So would you like to shed some?
So we have different skills. So we have certain, animation and design skills. We have storytelling skills, and we have content creation skills. So essentially a mix of these, and we have about 8 people.
And they're all in-house, is it? Or do you work on a project basis?
No, mostly in-house. There are 1 or 2, but there are people who are constantly signed up with us to do the work.
Okay. I think there were some questions on Tolu Bommalata. Maybe if at a later point of time you want to connect, you can do that.
We're very happy. I mean, for people who have more specific questions or who'd like to reach out to us, we are both available on email. Paul is paul@sarmaya.in and pavitra@sarmaya.in. We're both, of course, you can find us through Sarmaya on Instagram. And, we're very happy to carry some of these conversations forward.
And at some point in time, I think we should figure out a way to do something together at Dakshina Chitra as well.
Of course.
When we are all opened up.
We would absolutely love to.
When we are already connected in many ways, but it'll be lovely to do something really as a project together. That would be lovely. Super. Thank you very much, Paul and Pavitra. It was a pleasure having both of you on the call today. And I think at least for me, what stood out was the way the digital museum can be mastered to not just hook people to come in, but to also stay in and have that sensorial experience. And also how you worked with children to take art there to them rather than expect them to come, and not just made that art a way of them seeing something, but also learning a little bit more about themselves and understanding themselves. And I think that's really the true purpose of art. Loved seeing some of the beautiful things in your collection, the coins, the album and prints, and some of the paintings and the textiles. And we'd love to see more of it at some point in time. And I think that's the best hook for us to go and click on your website.
Yes, or invite us to do a show at Dakshin Chitra.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lovely. So I think we're really happy when we were talking about this in Dakshin Chitra and looking at how we also have to be relevant in this time when the museum is closed and the center is closed. We thought of this idea, and I'm glad we did the first one of these series of talks with Sarmaya and two committed, passionate, and very tech-savvy people like you. So it really, really helped, and I think you've set the bar very high. And we're hoping that future sessions are going to be just as good.
Savvy. Should ask our children what they think of our tech skills.
No, but I think we still do well. I'm still impressed with that tiger sneaking into Amber Fort. Thank you very much.
Also from Jethro Buck.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. So we'll have this up online, both in the Sarmaya page and on the Dakshin Chitra page. And I'm hoping that more people will reach out to both of us with more questions.
But Mrs. Radhakrishnan, you had a question.
For me? No, I didn't have a question. I just said thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Really
thank you then.
Thank you all for having us. It was lovely to be here.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Follow Sarmaya on Instagram for more stories and go to our
website. Definitely you're going to get all of us looking at your Insta page very soon.
Lovely. Paul drives us very hard. This is his #1 question to us every week. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank you. Thank you, Nalini.
See you. Bye.